And we're live. What's going on, everyone? This is Chad Sheehan here with my lovely co-host, Melissa Hayden. This is the Primal Performance Podcast, episode number 1. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Episode number 1. Do you like that? So yeah, thanks guys for tuning in. Like I said, episode number 1, the goal of this podcast, we've been talking about a podcast for a long time now.
A long time.
Yeah. The main point of this podcast and why we wanted to start this is to not just share information and to collaborate with industry leaders in yoga, strength conditioning, and the broad health and wellness space, but also to kind of take a deep dive into different subjects, and then call out some bullshit. With the prevalence of social media today, we see a lot of misinformation, especially from people that are unqualified. It's one thing to be qualified and to have a stance in something that might not be specifically backed by evidence, and that's okay. But when we start to see the so-called influencers in the space sharing information, and then general population or the general public taking this information that they're producing and taking it as good evidence in something they can implement into their lifestyle, and for people that are not just educated but have done the work and have skin in the game, that's super frustrating. So I think, and this is going to be a topic we speak about today, is what we see in the industry, what we think should change or needs to change, and how we can do better, and then how you and I can put out quality information along with a lot of the other industry leaders that we have befriended and that we follow and we listen to ourselves. But first, why don't you introduce yourself?
And thank you very much, Melissa Hayden. And I'm really excited to be doing this with you. I think there are a lot of, when we talk about overall health and well-being, sometimes people look at that in silos, like they will go out and just focus on going to the gym, or they focus on specific exercise, or even a certain dietary route. And I think health it's like a multi-pronged stool, and we have not just the physical component, but the mental or the emotional component, as well as your recovery and nutrition. And you and I both have a lot of experience in a lot of these different areas. And you're talking about misinformation and the rise of social media and how that perpetuates the misinformation. The effect for a lot of people is really harmful. And even though it's often well-intentioned by coaches, trainers, yoga teachers, there are a lot of different areas where we're seeing some negative results happen. You can look at disordered eating. You can look at the harm that's done in the mental and emotional side of things. And I think it's a really good opportunity to take this information where we have really credible people who have the education and the experience, combined with the ability to critically think. I think that's another area where people will cherry pick different studies and then not have the ability to apply it into their teaching, into their coaching, into their training. And it's an exciting opportunity to use this podcast and leverage our unique areas of expertise. I guess this is probably a good time to give a little bit of background on both of us. So I am a yoga teacher with probably over 15 years experience teaching and over 25 years practicing.
Real quick, so for those that don't know, that aren't in the yoga space, accreditation comes from a certifying body. And what's the name of that again?
Yoga Alliance.
So the maximum amount of hours, it's usually determined via a 200 and a 500 hour
Correct.
RYT?
Yeah. So through Yoga Alliance, you become a registered yoga teacher, and they have 200 and 500-hour designations, and ERYT, which stands for experienced, which is additional hours and time spent teaching.
Oh, so, having been in the yoga space for a very short period of time, having very little experience in yoga, and then watching you, and I've been to a couple of your trainings. I've had the pleasure of meeting some of your the other professionals in your space through you. It's easy to, a lot of people post that, or on their bio, they have that 500-hour certification. One thing that sticks out about you is, and I had a feeling you weren't going to share this, but you're not just a practitioner of 15 years, right? You also coach yoga teachers on how to not just be yoga teachers and get certified, but how to be better. And that's what that's your main job here, right?
Yeah. So that's really where, having taught for over 15 years and practice for over 25, I've accumulated obviously a lot of practicing hours, but a lot of teaching hours as well. And my main focus for the last several years has been in training yoga teachers at both the 200 and the 500-hour level and beyond. I think there's, it's one of the things that tends to be missing in the yoga space is this whole idea of being trauma informed and the whole mental health side of it that is not included in a lot of 200 or 300-hour trainings. And we talk a lot in yoga about the impact that it can have on the stress response or managing stress, but we have not all, but a lot of trainings don't really even talk about the stress response and how complex stress can show up and what parts of yoga. So it's not just the physical poses, but what actual parts of yoga can help people navigate stressful situations. But there's also one of the areas you and I have had a lot of conversations about this, and it'll be something that we explore on probably future podcasts, but the importance of including an evidence-based approach in teaching yoga. And if you guys can hear the snorting in the background, it is Bob, who is a French bulldog, who you guys will see as we get rolling with this podcast, but I guess he's a co-host too.
Yeah, I can't believe we didn't introduce Bob. This is actually this isn't fair, right, Bob? Yeah, so Bob's a 35-pound French bulldog. He thinks he's 135 pounds with that ego of his. But yeah, like Melissa said, if you guys hear snorting or squeaking or whatever the case may be, that is Bob, the other co-host. But yes, anyways, so like you were saying, going back to what you do, what your mission is now within the space. How do you practice? What work do you do with patients and clients in the space?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I work both with studios. I work with individual yoga teachers who want to expand their education, whether they want a really anatomy informed approach. If they want more of they want to look into like the trauma stress side of it. I have multiple certifications in teaching trauma informed yoga, especially to veterans with PTSD. I've worked a lot with first responders who have wanted to develop different programs to take yoga into, let's say, a firehouse and other areas. My approach is typically anatomy informed and evidence based. One area that you and I have talked a lot about is the yoga space has not done well in keeping up with the current research that we have about movement, about even we're starting to see really interesting studies around the impact of meditation. When a lot of times people will say something like, yoga yoga is scientifically proven to benefit stress. The thing is, there are a lot of components to yoga. Is it the meditation? Is it the breath work? Is it the yoga poses? If you are talking about the yoga poses, exactly what style of yoga was featured in the study there. So there's a lot of different components to it, and really evolving this practice and the way the practice is taught so that it is inclusive and accessible for everyone. So yeah, I work a lot with both individuals in terms of like mentorship and coaching, also with studios in helping people, whether it's leading a trauma or anatomy module, helping with the entire 200 or 300 hour teacher training. I also work one-on-one with people who want to do their 200 and 300 hour as well. So, and what my big thing is, actually, I want people to, when they practice yoga, to be better at doing the things that, like, not just the poses, but better in their everyday life. It's one of the benefits that I get from the practices that actually helps me be better in my training, which it's kind of, I was hoping to segue into like your approach, because I know your approach in the training realm. You are a coach, you are also in graduate school to become a chiropractor. So you bring a lot of really unique aspects to training and overall health and wellness. So how about you give some?
Yeah, no, real quick, before getting into my background, and that's something I want to point out that I appreciate a lot about the work that you do is just like any other industry, yoga, strength and conditioning, a sports specific industry, there's a lot of nonsense that's spewed out from these coaches and from these yoga practitioners and teachers. And seeing the work that you do in, breaking these things down on a boilerplate and picking apart the nonsense and, as you call it, the stupid shit yoga teachers say, right? Like that's, and I love that, because there's a lot of crap that's said from these yoga teachers, whether it's in the class, in the studio, to their students, or outside of the class on social media and on their platforms. So yeah, thank you for what you do, and you make it very digestible and applicable to those that are practicing yoga by themselves, those that are practicing yoga within a studio with a full class, and or yoga professionals that are teaching these practices, whether that be traditional hot yoga, vinyasa flow, whatever that may be. So that's something I appreciate greatly, and something I want to really get into in later episodes. And we'll touch on this today. This is more of an introductory podcast, just to introduce ourselves, and then talk about like what our goals for this podcast is. But yeah, I would love to touch on that a little bit more today. But anyways, I'm again, as Melissa said, strength conditioning coach, have multiple certifications. No need to get into the list there, but I work with individuals, teams, whether it's high school, college, and middle school teams, along with combat athletes. So my main focus right now, and the larger populations that I work with, are combat sports athletes. So wrestling, mixed martial arts, and then combat individuals such as EMT, fire, police, and special forces, special operations, military, ex-military. And then as time has progressed, I've filtered into other sports. But yeah, just like you were pointing out, and specifically with the special populations community, the EMT, the fire, the police, trauma is a huge part in strength conditioning that's really untouched. It's not specifically a scope of practice or within a scope of practice for coaches, but something that needs to be spoken about. Tools that can be used by coaches when things come up. and how to work around these conversations with athletes, with clients, and when to refer out to someone that's actually skilled in that profession. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and talk about?
Well, no, I love that. I mean, you and I have had so many conversations around this, is especially in the coaching and training industry. People will come in with trauma. Let's not just use trauma. Yes, trauma is a broad, but highly stressful situations. And for coaches and trainers to not have any kind of awareness of how the stress or trauma can show up in the physical body, whether it is in terms of, maybe the person isn't ready for the workout that they have planned for them. Long-term chronic stress and trauma can show up in the body as pain. And so some of the stupid things that, let's say, yoga teachers say, but also that I think trainers and coaches will say, is to ignore that pain. What are some of the stupid sayings, like pain is weakness leaving the body? It's actually our job, I think, as movement professionals, not to brush that kind of pain aside, but to help people start to distinguish types of pain.
Yeah, wouldn't you say pain's more of a mechanism to say, hey, let's pull back a little bit here, and there's different qualities of pain too. And that's something that's very important. When a client or a patient says, ow, that hurts, well, our first job is to say, okay, well, where does that hurt, and what does that hurt feel like? What's the quality of your pain? How would you rate the pain? Something that we're learning in my program right now is qualities of pain, locations of pain, what the quality means. If it's a deep throbbing pain, it's a vascular pain. If it's a sharp stabbing pain, that might be more of a nervous system pain, right? There are different forms of pains, and then those different forms of pains require different treatment protocols, right? So again, going back to coaching and pain, whether that's an emotional or a physical pain, or both, we need to know how to discern between the two, and how to, we need to listen. A lot of these coaches are not listening. Okay, oh, well, push past the pain. Well, again, what type of pain is it? Let's not push past it. If it's a stabbing pain rather than a discomfort, well, this exercise in this particular moment might not be the best thing for this patient or client, right? So let's pull back, let's reassess. Well, first, why is that pain happening? Is the mechanism of exacerbating that pain the specific exercise, or what?
I think we're gonna have to do a whole series on pain, because it is so complex. Because the other piece that you're speaking to is also in the realm of, in some instances, if someone has disassociated, because let's say you don't know their history, a lot of times you will, but if someone is disassociated, they may not be tuned into that pain. They're used to masking it. They're used to tolerating these things. And pain, especially as we're exercising, is your body's, it's a mechanism by the body to provide feedback. And if we tune it out and push past it, eventually we're going to get to a different level of pain where the body just shuts things down, because our nervous system is geared towards basically one thing: keeping us as an organism safe and alive, and coming everything back to balance, back to homeostasis. And the things that threaten that, and it's stress, right? Stress, trauma, you can't overload one system of the body and not have it show up in other systems. It's not the body doesn't isolate and it doesn't discern those different types of stress. And for trainers, for yoga teachers, for coaches, not to acknowledge that and always kind of perpetuate this societal norm of go hard or go home, or pushing past pain, or pain is a symbol of weakness, is really borderline irresponsible, I think, in the industry. And so helping our clients and our students lean into being able to name it, and then deciding, because it's not that pain is always an indication of stopping exercise because
course.
that indicates that we might be fragile. But it's actually learn, and a lot of us live with chronic pain, and it doesn't necessarily, like I've got, since you're my coach, like elbow stuff and knee stuff that shows up, and that's just that's a part of moving your body. And that kind of pain isn't necessarily like, oh, I guess can't exercise today. It's like, no, how do we adapt the workout to manage that? But I think it's our responsibility as movement professionals not to ignore it, but to understand the significance of pain, both how it can be, it can be driven by an injury, or it can be driven by, but it can also be driven by something stress related or trauma related. And so having an understanding of, even a general understanding, is really important, I think, in this profession.
Yeah. And like what you said, with, for example, you have medial epicondylitis, especially, pain in the medial elbow. You even get radiculopathy down into your fingers. And we've kind of pointed that towards that being more of a nerve root issue, or an entrapment in your anterior shoulder. So what are things that we can do? So one, why is it hurting? Let's find root cause. Two, what are we going to do for that root cause? Three, okay, so we don't want to stop training. And for some people, they don't love training like we do. But whether you're that person or you're someone that loves training, the person that loves training is not going to want to stop training because their elbow hurts. Most people are going to push past it, right? That's never a good thing, right? So how can we adapt our training around the injury to continue to progress while working and rehabbing that injury, and thus over time getting back to your normal training schedule and protocol? Right? But that's super important. And like you said, that what's the quote again? Pain is weakness leaving the body.
Mhm.
That's fucking ridiculous. Yeah, I don't even know how I feel about that quote. It's stupid, and that's something that's said a lot, right? Especially by strength conditioning coaches. But yeah, we need to sit back and take a deeper look at the specific pain and why that pain's occurring. And again, going through that step-by-step process to, if we continue to push past that pain and possibly create even more pain or injure the athletes, well, one, that's on us. That's not on the athlete. Our job is to keep the athlete safe and moving pain-free and progressing them and getting them better at their sports. And if it's someone in Gen Pop, it's definitely not our job to hurt them and have them push past pain. They should be coming to us to get better, live longer, feel better, right? Move pain-free. So,
well, what you're speaking to, and this is I think one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast, is because this opens up so many different doors. Is like, as trainers, as coaches, as yoga teachers, like we want to be helping people cultivate a healthy lifestyle. How long can we keep them in the gym, and not just like having their workout be just something they do like for an 8-week block or like a 30-day challenge. It's like, it's the key to longevity. It's the key to overall health, is building exercise as a part of your daily routine, as well as recovery, as well as paying attention to your nutrition, as well as managing your mental health and well-being. So I think you're pointing to, whether it's an athlete, whether it's everybody, Gen Pop is general population. It's how we keep people, whether they're working with an injury, whether they're just working with chronic pain, how we keep them in the gym long-term for years and years and years. And the thing, like, we're taking this specific to yoga, is there are a lot of the ways that this practice, especially I would say power or vinyasa yoga, a lot of the ways that the practice is taught, a lot of the poses inherently are not going to be sustainable long-term for people. They rely on hypermobility or hyperflexibility and really limb length to get into. We push people into twists, into forward folds, into backward bends that are really focused more on hyper flexibility rather than a functional flexibility or even functional strength. So that'll come up definitely in future podcasts.
Is that just the culture in yoga?
That's a good question. I think so. The heart of what a yoga practice, it's always been inclusive, is it's always been accessible. The yoga poses that are practiced now are really way more modern, obviously, probably within the last 100 years.
When you say modernized, what do you mean by that?
So we talk about yoga is an ancient practice, and the parts of it that are ancient are not the poses. And the parts that are really healing actually are not the poses. It's found more in the spiritual practices in terms and the breath work and the meditative aspects of it and the mindfulness aspect. Most of the poses that we practice modern day actually are really rooted in hyperflexibility, hypermobility, and they rely on a certain limb length. If you Google just any yoga pose, whether it's like Warrior 2 or tree pose or half moon, when you pull up a Google search, I guarantee you 99% of the people that are of the images that they turn up are very tall, very slender, just very similar body types.
Okay.
They aren't well represented, and these poses kind of rely on that. And so for some people who have a certain body type, for some people who have a certain flexibility genetically built into them, have an easier time getting into these postures. But for some of us who maybe practice yoga for different reasons, a lot of the poses might not always be accessible or even comfortable. So it's just, that's the whole reason for being more anatomy informed and knowing how the body, it's an anatomy informed within context. And you and I have had a lot of conversations around context. Like a back squat, for example, might not be for everyone. We need more context. Like, do I want a back squat?
Wait, a back squat's not for everyone? Are you kidding me?
Because it needs context, right?
Yeah, right.
So
the internet just blew up.
People are so mad at you already.
Oh yeah.
So, but that's the same goes for different yoga poses. Not everybody is meant to get into wheel, or not everybody is meant to be able to go super deep in a twist. We just want to, it's great that we know anatomy, but the other key component to that is also knowing how the body is meant to move. And that I'm super excited to get deeper into that as we go in these podcasts.
Yeah, speaking to the spiritual component and the breathwork component of yoga, the poses may not be the more ancient side of the practice, but do you think the breathwork and the mindfulness within the pose is what's powerful?
It's actually the combination. So this is the cool thing, is it's actually a combination of all of it. For some of us, especially those of us who might be more type A personality, just dropping into a meditation and expecting to quote unquote be still or access stillness is almost unrealistic. And so we do know that there is power and benefits from meditation and mindfulness. It's combining it with the ability to move, the somatic experience of being in the body, plus layering in, as you're moving, intentional breath. And then that gives you a single point of focus, which can, rather than expecting people to drop into a seated meditation, which for some people can be more triggering. It can put people, especially if people are overthinkers like myself, like it puts you directly into an ability to overthink something, or it can put you right into traumatic memories. So being able to combine movement, that physical movement, with those other practices is sort of the combination is really powerful. But the thing is, and this is what I'm really passionate about, is that is not exclusive for someone going to a yoga studio. And I think that's the important takeaway for the practice, is like, so just because you don't go to a yoga studio, you don't get those benefits. You can access those key parts of a yoga practice underneath a heavy bar in a weight room. I find when I go to train, that's when I'm more focused than even when I'm on a yoga mat. Like I can, and it's not that I need to access stillness, but that single point of focus, I find I have to be like, it's all about either practice. It's about being present, right? Where your body and your brain know that they're in the same place at the same time. And there is nothing that gets me more present than before you're going to go under a heavy load. Because if you're not present, then that's when an injury can occur. And I'm dealing with enough of my injuries, like I would prefer not to add on to that. So being present is one of the biggest benefits that I get out of a yoga practice, but it doesn't always just have to occur in a yoga studio.
Yeah, and speaking to the mindfulness and the meditative side of things, you touched on those that don't necessarily, meditation itself doesn't work for them. Sitting down and getting in this flow state or whatever the fuck you see on social media these days. Yeah, real quick. Well, as we're getting into this, because this is a topic that I find frustrating for myself. You go online and there's a million books and posts on social media about meditation practice, right? And of all things, there's so much misinformation out there on that. But yet there's a ton of literature in science written on this, but yet there's so much misinformation. If someone were to go on social media and not just read all the benefits of meditation, but also, the breathwork practices and the postures and positions you can sit in or lie in during meditation, and the length of time and the environment around you, all the things, for me specifically, and this, we've talked about this plenty of times, I can't just sit still in silence and meditate. I actually get even more upset and aggravated sitting in silence. Like if I'm cross-legged, sitting on a pillow in a dark room, as social media would tell you to do, I start to think about, I have an itch on the bottom of my foot. My knees bother me in this position. My back hurts in this position. I have an itch on the back of my head. I am focused on my test tomorrow, or I am focused on a conversation that bothered me earlier in the day. And all of these things start to come up when I sit down and try to meditate. But like you said, when you go into the weight room and you go to train, you're hyper focused and you're mindful of everything around you, right? The same goes for me. And also, like, we just had this conversation last night, I'm looking into bow hunting and using a compound bow and target practice as a form of meditation. The same goes for my shooting. I love firearms training and target practice, whether it's indoors or outdoors. Whether it's the breathing mechanisms behind the training, the trigger drawback time, the awareness of where you are in space and time, the target in front of you. You have a linear point out in front of you that you're focusing on. There's one sole purpose of that trigger drawback, right? Having a feeling, a tactile feedback from the firearm in your hand or the bow in your hands. You can relate this right to strength conditioning and in, say, weightlifting. The mechanics of your squat or your lunge or whatever movement you're performing, the breath mechanics, breathing through 360 through your diaphragm, getting super tight, the tactile feedback from your feet that you're getting from the floor, grabbing the ground with your toes, making sure your heels on the ground, corkscrewing your feet outward into external rotation, driving your feet out in the frontal plane to tighten the abductors of your hips so that you can descend with X amount of load on your back safely, and then come back up in that concentric motion and perform the lift. There's a mindfulness in that too, right? Like, it doesn't just need to be in yoga,
Right.
and it doesn't just need to be in strength conditioning. It could be a rowing crew for his or her college team, where they're mindful of what they're doing, the execution, right? The environment around them. That might be their form of meditation, correct? So can you kind of speak more on that, and like what you know much more than I do when it comes to this. I'm just sharing my experience for myself and when working with others.
Well, I think it goes back to also this idea of context, right? There is a lot of amazing evidence and scientific research out there that tells us the benefits of meditation. The thing is some of the studies don't specify what style of meditation it is, and that's what you're speaking to. Yeah, so for you, like, you probably would be one of the last people that I'd be like, you know what you should do, like a seated meditation. You and I've had this conversation, like, actually, please don't, like, because it makes things worse for you.
Yeah, how many times have I put that on my to-do list or my things to do for the day and never cross it off? Because I look at that, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm already a little on edge from the day. And if I go into meditation, I'm going to be even more on edge.
And I think it's what we do as in a wellness industry is make people wrong by doing that, especially, let's say, someone with like generalized anxiety disorder. Like, you're already tending to overthink. And this is where the yoga industry needs to really, I think, step forward, is also being like, just take a deep breath in. All you have to do is show up and breathe. Granted, we all are doing that, but for some people, taking that deep breath in is triggering, and it's not the right course of action. And so it's like, yes, it could be the right tool for you, but I think we as movement professionals can't be attached to it as the only tool. Like, if it doesn't work for someone, like if seated meditation doesn't work for you, and you can access presence and a sense of clarity bow hunting or running or underneath a heavy bar, then that is your form of meditation. It's like, actually, let's not be attached to what it looks like, but give the person the tool where they get to decide what, if it's the tool for them. In the realm of trauma too, letting someone have that control is more important than the actual tool itself. And that is, like, again, where coaches or trainers don't have any kind of awareness around trauma and mental health, not realizing that you unintentionally could reinforce or cause harm in that arena by pushing a certain quote or idea, like, take a deep breath in, like, this breath will relax you. Well, what if it doesn't? Why do you need to be right about it? Just give them a different tool and let the person decide what's best for them. Because that is, I mean, that's the thing. Do I know, like, meditation, seated meditation has all of these different benefits. Absolutely. But there are times that it doesn't work, and that's okay. Like, and I know a lot, especially coming out of COVID, I know a lot of, myself being one of them, but I know a lot of yoga teachers who stepping onto their yoga mat wasn't a safe space. And that's okay. Like, there, it really is, like, it just at that time, even with all of the different benefits, breath work, movement, the physical poses, the meditative aspect to it, whatever it was that you were accessing, it wasn't the right tool at that time. And like, I think we tend to want to force that solution, like, just keep going and it'll get better. And it's like, well, it might not.
Yeah, actually might get worse, right?
Yeah.
You know, one thing I want to speak to, and now that we've gotten into this in later episodes, I'd love to go deep in the weeds on the evidence behind meditation in peer-reviewed research, but also some anecdotal evidence that you found in working with individuals and with other teachers, but also different forms of breathwork practices and meditative practices. One thing I do want to touch on in today's episode is NSDR, and guided specifically, like a yoga nidra. And if anyone doesn't know what NSDR stands for, it's non-sleep deep rest. This can be in the form of self-guided or a guided meditation, whether that's through a YouTube video recording or another individual next to you reading off of a script, yoga nidra. So I'll have Melissa explain what yoga nidra is and the background of it or the history of it. But real quick, so I did a training with Melissa years ago in Washington, D.C. And I can't stand working in groups of people because I'm a perfectionist and I always like to be in charge, something I probably need to work on as I open up a practice one day. But I was forced to work with an individual or actually multiple individuals in this practice during this training, and we did a yoga nidra script where we read yoga nidra to another individual, and the room was silent. We had probably 60, 70 people in that room that day, trainees. And this was actually my first positive experience with, would you call it meditation?
Yeah.
Mindfulness?
Yoga nidra.
Yeah. This was my first really positive experience with a moment in time where I sat in silence and I was focusing on very few things. And what's beautiful about the script of Yoga Nidra is it's actually guiding you in what to focus on at that particular point in time throughout the script. And I think there's power in that, and I'll have you speak to that. But I don't know how long that script takes, depending on how fast the reader reads it to you. It's usually done in a slower form to be more relaxing. But I almost passed out, and this is in a room of 70 people. When there's a bunch of other people reading the script to their partners as well. It was a really powerful experience. And since then, the only meditation that's been efficacious for me has been an NSDR type of meditation, where I'm listening to a recording, whether that's on Spotify or on YouTube, where I feel really good afterwards and refreshed. And we can, like I said in later episodes, we'll get into the science behind meditation practice and the benefits of such. But can you speak to Yoga Nidra and NSDR?
So Yoga Nidra it's a deep, to simplify, it's like a deep yogic sleep. There are different, I don't want to call them styles, but there's lots of different ways for people to form a script. And the one that we'll specifically take a look at in a later episode is based on the IRS methodology, which has a lot of science behind it. But it is, depending on the study that you cite, 30 minutes of a Yoga Nidra practice can have this very similar results as 3 hours of deep REM sleep in your central nervous system. So it's a extremely powerful tool, especially for people who have trauma, complex stress, who struggle. You don't even have to have complex stress or trauma, but for people who struggle with sleep, can be a restorative practice for them. And there are different parts of the script. It's almost like an equation, if you will, where it's like a body scan combined with specific breathing practices. There's a location of like an inner experience where you're going back and forth between opposites. So like a time when you feel tense, like experience that, and then remember a time when you were relaxed and experience that. And so being able to locate and name opposites is a pretty powerful practice. And then the whole idea of a body scan, some people will combine like a tense and relax, where like when you bring your awareness to your fingers, then you tighten up your fingers and then you relax your fingers. And it's again layered with that experience of like locate a time when you were very tense and then locate it with, and then physically doing it. Plus a more intentional, usually you'll see that in a script where there's some breathing practices. And it is you go through different stages of like relaxation, and we'll get into the science behind it in later episodes, but even if you zone out and you actually are still subconsciously listening to the person's voice, guiding you through the different stages of relaxation, and then very intentionally and consciously bringing you back and awake. So it's one of those one of the spiritual practices that is really powerful. And it does go by different names, whether it's MSDR, Yoga Nidra, but it is a super powerful technique.
When will you normally use Yoga Nidra in a context over other forms of practice?
That's a good question. So it really is a powerful standalone practice. It's a powerful standalone practice, and you'll see it at yoga studios as its own separate class. I personally will sometimes take different pieces, like different pieces of it, and incorporate it into Shavasana. I've done it just as standalone offerings with clients as well, or groups of people. And you can people do it online too. You can lead it online, but there are tons of free resources out there for it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, in later episodes, we'll have to get into, again, take a deeper dive into meditative practices, evidence behind them, and then some tools for not just those practicing yoga, but for people that just want to be in the comfort of their own home or workplace and utilize meditative practice as a tool to improve lifestyle and possibly manage stress and anxiety.
Yeah, and I think it'll be a great resource. We'll definitely take a look at that into future episodes. And I think the one thing actually that we didn't really pull into this episode, which is totally fine because it didn't really naturally go there, but the whole idea of nutrition, it's something that both you and I have an interest in and different trainings in, but that will come up is the importance of fueling our body in terms of training, and also in terms of overall health. We tend to, I think, whether it's in something like a Yoga Nidra training, we look for these short-term or simple hacks, if you will, to make things easier, better. And sometimes there isn't like a hack, sometimes like maintaining health, overall health, it can take a little bit of work, and that's okay. It's one thing in training yoga teachers. A lot of times I think yoga teachers, and I would argue trainers and coaches tend to want this too, is like it's not always welcome for something to feel challenging or to feel hard as we're working on it. I know a lot of yoga teachers, like when they're learning to teach yoga, they get very frustrated very easily in terms of cueing and wanting to be at a certain level in their career faster. And I think that shows up in a lot of different areas in people's lives too. And, like in the context of teaching yoga, like it takes a lot to learn the different components, what goes in, like the anatomy, the history, and the philosophy, the mental health side of things, and then teaching as a skill and developing all of those things. And I think as we look at this podcast being like a resource for people, all things health and well-being, nutrition is a really important aspect of it. And we tend to look at where's the protein bar that's going to get me my protein. It's like, well, there's more context around that. Your protein bar is also giving you a lot of other shitty ingredients too. There's, I think, a lot of different ways that we can go, which I'm excited to get into, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said, people are looking for this one tool, this one pill that is a cure-all, right, to all of their problems, whether that be meditation, whether that be a supplement, whether that be an ice bath, or whether that be train really hard and you'll lose weight, or just eat right, whatever right is, to lose the weight that you need to lose. Well, first of all, who said you need to lose weight, and how much weight do you need to lose? What is healthy? What is a healthy diet? What is a good workout or a training session? What is the right temperature for your ice bath? Like these are all things that are in context, right?
Yeah.
And like health, wellness, longevity, sports performance, movement performance, and efficiency. We need to turn this into a global approach, right? You can't just focus on the mindset. You can't just focus on the periodization or programming specifics and minutia. You can't just focus on the nutrition. Everything needs to be focused in on how much sleep are you getting, the quality of your sleep. What are your, what's your lifestyle like? Are you eating really well throughout the week, training hard, and then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday going out with your friends and binge drinking and eating like crap, where you're taking 2 steps forward during the week and 3 steps back on the weekend and repeating that process every single week? And then a year down the line, why haven't I gotten better when I worked so hard during the week, Monday through Thursday or Sunday through Thursday, right? So like taking that global approach to health is so important, and something that I want to touch deeply on within each subject and with each component of that global health approach through these short discussions. And then also to speak to leaders of the industry or industries and their respective fields on these components of health. I have a great example, actually. So through social media and at school and at the gym where we train at, a new trend, and this should be actually the podcast's or this episode's title is fitness trends today, right? Minimalist shoes, barefoot shoes. And you know how much I love my minimalist shoes, right? It's something I have prescribed to for years now. I've been wearing minimalist shoes for the past 5 years. 5 years, I think it has been. I got my first pair of Vivo barefoot. If you haven't heard of them, you've been living under a rock. But there's this massive swing towards the minimalist movement and the barefoot movements. And I was actually just listening to a podcast with Emily Spletchel, who's a PhD podiatrist. She's spoken all around the world. She owns the company Nabosu, which focuses on sensory inputs for the foot via textured pads and soles that go into your shoes, and soft tissue implements such as stippled mobility balls that you can kind of break in half or roll around on the plantar fascia of your foot. And she had a lecture on or with the NSCA at the NSCA conference for coaches like 5 years ago. And I'm listening to her talk about the axes of the foot and movement specifics and the minutia of the anatomy and physiology of the foot and the biomechanics, not in a stick figure sense, not in even a cadaveric sense, in a sense of real life movement, functional movement. And you overuse that word functional, but the arches of the foot and the fascia of the foot and how that ties into the anterior and posterior fascial slings of the body as we work up the chain of the human body. And I'm driving, listening to this speech, and this is something I love, foot mechanics and its relation to performance and the understanding of how the foot should operate under load or without load, and how that relates to gait analysis and gait biomechanics, and then how we can use that information to point at weaknesses or where we're losing an athlete or a individual is losing energy through the kinetic chain during movements. And I couldn't help myself but to think like how complex this is, but yet we have these fitness influencers that are pushing these barefoot shoes or training barefoot or these minimalist shoes, right? When the book Born to Run by Christopher McDougall came out, I forget what year that was published. Fantastic book. If you haven't read it, go on Amazon, get yourself Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. I believe I'm pronouncing his name properly. But that's a phenomenal book. And after that was published, you saw this massive swing in people wearing Vibram 5-finger shoes, the crazy looking.
Yep. You have two pairs, right?
Yeah, I love my Vibram 5-fingers. But without understanding the specifics and application and use of these shoes, from going into your scrunched up Nikes with a heel drop and a thick 3/4 inch pad underneath your foot, between your foot and the ground, all the way to wearing a minimalist shoe where you have like 2 or 3 millimeters of sole between the ground and your foot, and 0 arch support and 0 padding for absorption. Well, one, the mechanical stress and kinetic energy that's placed on the ankle joint and the bones and the tendinous units of the foot have increased drastically. 2, because forever, when you've been wearing these shoes, you have been striking the ground with X amount of force. When you wear these thicker soled shoes, you're striking the ground with more force so you can get some tactile feedback to tell your body where you are in space and time so that your nervous system can send that information back up to your brain. Now that we take off those shoes and we're wearing Vibrams, so you just think all of a sudden your body's going to stop producing that force as we strike the ground and our landing phases of gait? No. So when this book came out, we saw all of these injuries. Podiatrists start making a lot of money. They bought yachts later that year because so many people were injuring themselves. Without the understanding of tissue tolerance and mechanics behind switching from your standard shoe, whether that's an Asics, a Nike, an Adidas, whatever that may be, to a minimalist shoe, Vivo, Vibrams, doesn't matter the company, the principle still stands. We need to stop pushing out this information as a community, as an industry, without context, right? Yeah. Context is everything. And we're going to keep talking about that in later episodes.
Well, I think it's huge. And I think it's our job as, I'm going to say movement professionals. And every time I say that, let's just assume we're talking trainers, coaches, yoga teachers, because we're all coaching movement at the end of the day. But it's our job to go deep in the weeds like that so that we have the context and then be able to deliver it to our clients and our students in one simple cue.
Yeah.
Because it is complex and there's a lot of information. And if we don't go in and we don't take the time and put in the work to understand it, then we end up pushing out information like everybody should be wearing, just get rid of your Nikes and go. And I'm slowly making the transition, but there are times that I want to wear my Metcons. I was doing a sled push the other day and I feel better, or rowing for some reason in Metcons. Is the transition happening to my Vivos? Absolutely, but it's over time. Our job as professionals, though, is one, to know the context, like you're saying, you're pointing to, which is really important, but then be able to communicate it to our clients and our students in a really simple and relatable manner. but we have to go through the weeds first and get the context so that we can do that. And I think that at times can be
that's missing. Yeah, it's a lot of the time it's missing,
Yeah.
right? And then these people that are pushing these shoes or products have no idea the implications, right? Again, the book had a fantastic approach to the foot and the history as we evolved as a human race, and minimalist shoes and foot biomechanics. But people take these things out of context. So it's our job as movement professionals to explain, right? Like, not all my athletes wear minimalist shoes. If especially my combat athletes, they are training and performing barefoot. The barefoot shoes, perfect for them because they're barefoot in their sport. A sprinter, a football player, a court athlete, a field athlete, they're in shoes with these narrow foot boxes, right? So all of a sudden, we are giving them all this tactile feedback during sport-specific training and strength conditioning within the strength conditioning facility. Then they get out in the field to perform, and that feedback changes. Not necessarily a bad thing, right? But there's a compounding effect. And then also, we have to focus on tissue tolerance too. Slowly weaning yourself into that shoe. Just walking in the shoe from a day-to-day perspective, once a week, then twice a week, then 3 times a week. Oh, now we can train a little bit in them. Maybe I'll do an upper body session where I'm walking around a lot and I'm picking things up. And then, all right, let's try a lower body session in the Vivos. Maybe half the lower body session, or things, a movement that's less demanding in terms of elastic components of the ankle and the foot joints. And then over time, we can start to jump and we can start to bound and have these multi-directional plane movements in the shoe or barefoot, right? But again, there's so much misinformation and lack of context when the fitness industry is pushing these products. And I think this is the moral of today's podcast is let's create context around what information we're putting out there and be able to explain in a digestible and applicable way, right?
No, totally. And I think whatever your silo is or your area of expertise, whether it's strength and conditioning, yoga teaching, we tend to think because we have our clients, we have our students, we're like, no, like that doesn't apply to me. But the more you get outside of like I don't want to call it a comfort zone, but the area that you work in, and you have conversations, for example, I was teaching yoga in a gym, and teaching to people who would never go to a yoga studio, and being able to make the practice relatable. And we all need to kind of acknowledge that, yes, we have the people that we're working with, but because of the misinformation that's out there, because of different reasons, people aren't coming back, whether it's to train with you, to your group exercise class, to your yoga studio. There are plenty of people who are coming, sure, but there's a whole population of people who aren't.
You're missing out on that. That's something that you can attach to and draw in, right? And that's what's so incredible about the practice that you teach and share and it also might be because you have experience in the field of strength conditioning, right? You are a certified coach. You have spent years in big box gyms, small gyms, commercial gyms, working with that population and being within that population, being a member of that culture. You can relate the practice of yoga to strength conditioning, whereas whether it's a highly trained weightlifter or someone with a lesser training age goes into a yoga studio because their friend keeps ranting and raving about how great the yoga practice is. So they go in and then this person's talking. When meanwhile, they want to have some type of elastic component to the tissues of their hips and ankles and knees, and they want to be powerful and explosive. And they go into this yoga practice, and this teacher's like, "Oh, cool. You weightlift? Congratulations. I want you to hold this pose for 5 minutes. I want to tell you how great it is to be super flexible and hypermobile, because that's what's cool in yoga these days."
Right.
Meanwhile, that's not good for their body.
Right.
That's not good for their goals. Right.
Well, and so we have different professionals, whether it's strength and conditioning, or even medical professionals, like go to yoga, because there's information out there. But again, maybe this is the theme of the podcast. It's missing context. For your sprinters, like your basketball players, people who actually have to have that explosive component. Do we want them overly stretching them out? No, they need their tight hamstrings to access that explosiveness. And so there's almost, it's something that I'm super interested in. You and I have talked a lot about this, but it's like, actually, if we want to send our athletes to yoga, actually might have it complement their sport specific training protocol. So almost, work with their strength and conditioning coach, so that you're not working against them. So there's that, but that'll come up in future episodes. I think for our first one, this is not bad.
This is awesome. I'm really happy we did this and finally get the ball rolling on this first episode. Well, listen, if you've stuck with us this entire time, thank you very much. We are going to, once this podcast is put out and available to listen, we're going to try to get this on, or we will get this on iTunes or Apple Music and Spotify and YouTube. We will also have a link in the description on these platforms, linking you to our social media pages, where we provide evidence-informed approaches to training, fitness, yoga, all things health and wellness. But yeah, those links will be in the description of the podcast. We will be starting a page, Twitter and Instagram for the podcast specifically. And as we move further into the future and more episodes come out, we will be doing video recordings along with the audio recordings for the podcasts. And yeah, we're going to slowly let this thing evolve. We have lots of things in mind, and interviews and discussions with industry leaders in their respective fields. I am super excited.
Me too.
Anything else you want to add?
No, that's great. Yeah, no, super excited. Did we decide if we're doing this weekly or twice a month?
I think we said twice a month for now. With our schedules. Let's try to stick with that. And if we can do more, we will most certainly do more. When we post this on Instagram, we will have that Instagram link for the podcast specifically on the description of the podcast. And if you enjoyed this, please let us know. Drop a comment or a message onto our Instagram page. And let us know if there's anything that you want us to talk about, anything that you're interested in, any questions that you have. We will do a future Q&A episode or episodes as time progresses. And yeah, I'm super excited. Again, thank you very much. This has been Chad Sheehan and Melissa Leach on the first ever episode of Primal Performance Podcast. Woo! That sounds good. All right, guys, take care. See you soon.
Thank you.